Hello and welcome back to tutorial 4 in this Simsig introduction, and in this video I want to look at basic route operation on all of the simulations, and that means how do we get a train from point A to point B. Now we've already looked at things like timetables and head codes, so what you'll be doing even on the basic simulations is spending a lot of time clicking on head codes and finding out where things are going. Now in this case this train is about to go off of the simulation here, so I don't really care too much about that, but I am more interested in trains that are coming into this simulation and are coming along here, and if you remember in Aston they then come along here or along here, because I need to know whether to put the train into Four Oaks platform 3, into Blake Street platform 2, into platform 2 at Lichfield City, or whether they're going to go into platform 3 here in order to reverse. Now on this simulation most of the services are passenger services, and they will do one of those four things there and there, but of course there could always be an empty coaching stock train like that has a 5 at the start of it, or it could be any kind of engineering train as well. They might be going off the end here towards Derby, they might be reversing and going on to Lichfield low level. But the basic gist of most of these, which copies what the old mechanical panels used to do, is what we call an NX or entry exit methodology. And so what happens here, I'm just going to run the simulation for a bit and just check that we're running quite quickly here, just so that we're not waiting around too much. And one of the things that's important here is this is the next train that we're going to have to do something with, because as you can see it's going to come along here and we need to decide whether it's going to go to Lichfield City platform 2 or whether it's going into platform 3 here. So I'm just going to click on that a second, and it tells us that this terminates, like most of the trains, at platform 3 all the way here. Now normally entry exit just means that you click on the starting signal and then you click on the signal that you want to go towards, and then what will happen is the system will set the points across that route, and then it will give you a green or a yellow or double yellow, what we would call a proceed aspect. And so in this case clearly I can't do that until this train is out the way, otherwise the points will be locked. But we can see now that this is now clear, that route is now clear for me. So I click on the entrance and the exit signal, and that set the points. You notice here it's given me a proceed. I've also been sent another train, and this one is going to Four Oaks platform 3. Now what that means is I don't want to set all these signals to green once 2R08 has gone past, because otherwise this will come all the way to that green signal and then will stop. Then he will ring me and tell me that I'm sending him in the wrong direction, at which point I'd have to cancel down this route, and then there's all kinds of problems happen if you cancel a route with the train at a green signal. So what I've done is I've taken that button off of automatic, so once this train goes past, that route will cancel down and that signal will go to red, and that leaves me ready to signal this train into platform 3. One of the issues with Aston is that what will happen here, 2N19, if we just check what time that's due at Four Oaks, that's due 7:37 to 7:38. But if I click on this train, we'll notice that although this is due to arrive after 2N19 has gone through Four Oaks, in reality this train here will arrive at the junction early, and that's a timetabling issue that might be real life. But what it means is this will usually arrive 3 minutes early, and so therefore the train will wait at a red signal. He will then call me on the telephone, remember we looked at that as well, and he will say, I'm waiting at a red signal, what's going on? And then you'll have to tell him to wait a couple of minutes, and then eventually that train will pull away and we can send the train in. So there is kind of a way around this. The alternative is if I set this into Four Oaks, then normally I would not be allowed to set this route across here, and that's because of something called an overlap. You'll see that word overlap quite a lot, and what the overlap means is if this train is coming all the way along here, even if this signal's at red, there's always a chance that the train's not going to stop in time and it's going to go past the red signal. Now if that red signal is very close to a set of points, then the signaling system won't allow us to set a route across those points, on the theory that if a train is coming across here and this train doesn't stop at this red signal, then they're going to collide. So there's a minimum length of overlap, and that depends on the line speed as to how far that is. It might be 50 meters or so. And so what it won't let me do, and I'll show you what that looks like, if I set this across here and then I try and set this, then you'll notice here it say points are locked reverse by another route. In other words, it wants to set those points straight ahead to allow an overlap, but it can't do that because I've set this route across here. Now I've only done that because I know that this train is going to arrive before this one, but there is a way around it, and you see these little yellow call-on signals. What they allow us to do is to signal in the same direction, but this time it doesn't need an overlap at the signal. And the reason is something special happens to this signal when you use the call-on arrow. What happens is it stays at red, so normally that would have gone yellow to allow it to go forward to the red signal. But what will happen is now this signal will change on approach. So as soon as 2N19 gets to within a certain distance of this signal will then change. And the theory there is that the train will then be going slowly enough that even if it gets to here, it's going to be able to stop before it gets to the red signal. Whereas if that was showing a yellow and 2N19 comes around here at about 40 miles an hour, then it might run through the red light and need the overlap. So you'll see at some stations you have this call-on signal, it's a yellow arrow, and you can set the route that way. So what I've done here is I've allowed 2N19 to get into Four Oaks platform 2, but I've also set the route for 2U10 to come into platform 3. And what we'll notice is once this comes in, notice the auto code insertion that we talked about before gets put on there, and it says that that is now the service ready to leave Four Oaks. Now I was a little bit naughty because that's supposed to leave at 7:38 and it's already gone 7:38, but because I was trying to be clever, what I've done is I've swapped those two services round. So I can now set that route and that train will come out and obviously carry on along here on the green lines. In real life, I probably shouldn't have done that. In real life, sorry, I've got a train, it says waiting, 1Q somewhere. Right, let's just slow this down a second. I want to show you then something else that's going to happen here. Let's just pause it a second. On most of the simulations across most of the simulation, this NX system where you have a start and an end arrow is very common, and you can cancel that route down again. There is something special on this simulation, and it's called absolute block. And when I say special, this is actually something very old-fashioned. This is the original signaling. So when trains were first introduced, there was no signaling. A train would leave a station or leave a certain place, and the next driver would just have to make sure that at least so many minutes went past, and then he would go afterwards. And of course the problem is if the front train breaks down for some reason, especially as they found out if it's in a tunnel or somewhere where it can't easily be seen, then the train coming behind is going to crash into the train in front. So what they developed as a result of that was something called absolute block, which is what happens here. Now in absolute block there aren't any train describers in this area, and what that means is when these trains or any train goes into this area, I can't see where it is. But what happens is we have a signal box here at Alroas, and you'll notice it's represented here by a piece of signalling equipment. And then at the signal box at Lichfield, there's another one at the other end. And with absolute block, the basic idea is one signal box here who wants to send a train to the next signal box, click something here and is basically saying, by clicking that button here, is the upline clear? So it's C for clear. It's asking the question. It's not saying it is clear, it's asking if it is clear. Let me just slow this down even more so that I don't take too long to do this. Right, I'm going to unpause this. What will happen when that clicks is it flashes at the signal box at the other end, and the other signalman will get an indication to say the signal box at Alruwas is asking if the line is clear. And if he twists his little arrow and his piece of block signaling equipment, then that gets reflected at this end and says yes, the line is clear. Now what that allows this guy to do is set a signal here, and in this case, which is a bit annoying, there's also a level crossing, so we have to lower the level crossing before that signal will clear. I'll speed up a little bit. And what will happen here, once this is clear, I will then clear the signal across the level crossing by pressing this button. So you will have seen this in some of the other simulations if you've used them yet. Have a quick look at this. That's going through to Litchfield, so I'll send that through as well. So once this starts flashing here, it obviously takes usually about 30 seconds to a minute. It depends on the level crossing. So once I've cleared the level crossing, because this route's been set here, this signal box will then send 1Q24 into this untracked circuited section. Now I'm probably going to be running late now because I didn't notice that that train had come in. Now in this case, again, I've clicked on here, and what I need to note is that this train is actually going to Litchfield low level, which is down here, so it's not coming into Litchfield Trent Valley. So I've got that similar issue. If I set the route normally here, then that's going to block the junction, and that's going to stop me from sending my train down here. Now if I look at here, it's going to take me about 7 minutes to get to Litchfield low level, whereas this is going to take maybe 4 minutes to get to Trent Valley. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to block that junction by setting that signal. And what that means is that train can't cross here, but I know that this train is not going to take very long to reach Trent Valley, at which point this will all be clear again. I'm just going to check a couple of these. That leaves Four Oaks at 48. That leaves Four Oaks at 58. So that will be the next service to come up Four Oaks. So I just signal that so that's ready and out of the way. Now what happens back up here with our absolute block, and again most simulations don't have absolute block on them. Aston does, even though it's a small simulation, it does have this section. Really it's any signal control area that has a very old section of track, or a section that's not used very much. So most of the time this is only used for empty coaching stock or freight. So this is quite unusual here. This train is actually a Derby test train by the looks of it, because that's a network rail train. So it's been given a class 1 code, but in actual fact it's not really a class 1 train. Now as soon as that passes my signal here, I then click my red button to say the train is now on the line, and again this signal box then needs to acknowledge that. So it says, okay, I'm happy now, you wanted to send a train, you have now sent a train, it is now on the line. So I'm not going to send anything back down this line, not that I would, because in this case we have a double track, so there is space to send trains in different directions. Sometimes this would be a single track and it would be more of an issue, but I'm now not going to send anything into that block because I know there's a train, but I don't know where it is. I can't see on my indication where this is. But if I just have a quick look at the rest of it, everything else is still running as normal. That one there, notice, is going to Litchfield City, which is here. So I've got to keep an eye on some of these trains that are not going all the way to Trent Valley. That's really the only variation you get. Is it going to this station, or that one? Most trains don't reverse here, so we're not going to worry about that. Now, what's going to happen here, that's going to take a period of time. I can kind of get some idea of where this is. Because this is an automatic half barrier crossing, I will see this flash when the train gets towards Brookhay level crossing, and at that point, this is another feature we have of slotted signalling, is that I can't just send a train to Litchfield low level, and that in this case is because it's a single track. If I do that and Litchfield wants to send a train to me, then there's a possibility we're going to get gridlocked. So what happens is, if I want to send a train to Litchfield, I have to click this button, and that sends an indication to Litchfield signal box to say that we want to send a train in that direction. Let me just remove those. And Litchfield then has to acknowledge that before I'm allowed to signal that route, which I'm going to do in a second. So once I see this train getting towards Brookhay level crossing, when I see that flashing, it means that the barriers have gone down, and then I can request a slot. slots take a random amount of time to be acknowledged. Usually it's 30 seconds to a minute, but in some cases on some simulations it can take longer than that. So you need to learn from the instructions how long that slot takes, and some it seems to take 2 or 3 minutes, which means you can't wait for the train to come all the way to the signal. Otherwise it's going to be running a couple of minutes late waiting for the slot to be given. So that's now working. So I can now request the slot here. So notice I left click that, starts flashing. This route will close down in a second once that train has arrived. And so what I'm doing here is I'm saying to Lichfield, I have a train for you, can you take it now? That's really what I'm asking. And at some point, once that slot is given, a message will come up in the messages window, and that will change to a solid white button instead of a flashing white button. So that's fairly straightforward. This is now ready to reverse at 7:54. So that's fine. I don't have any other trains anywhere too close, so I'm going to set that. So notice here that the overlap now is cleared down because that train has stopped. The slot has now been given, so that's gone solid. So I can now go like this, set a route across there in the normal way, entry click, exit click. That route is now ready, which means once this service gets to the signal, this is another approach signal, which you get usually if the junction has a low speed limit. You'll find that that signal will stay on red until the train gets close to it, and again that's just to help the train know that it needs to slow down. That train's now coming into my track circuited section, and the last thing I'm going to need to do once this service has got past the signal completely, I then need to send that the track is now normal again from my end, and that's telling the signal box that the train has come out the other end. Now in real life I would have to check that it has a tail light on the back of a train to make sure that it hasn't come apart, hasn't separated somewhere in a non-track circuited section, and the way you do that is to make sure the tail light is on the end of the train. If it isn't, then I can't signal normal. I would know that something's wrong. I would need to stop the service if I can. If I can't, I'd ring up Lichfield and tell Lichfield to stop the service, and I would also call Aruas and say the train has split somewhere on here, and I would obviously need to get somebody to go and examine the line, usually a signalman, but maybe somebody else in a busier area. So that's the last thing that I'm going to do. You'll have a couple of problems sometimes on the larger simulations. It's not always easy to work out where you can signal, so you can't go from any signal to any other signal. So I wouldn't be able probably to go from here to here, because these signals are only facing up. They're only facing trains going this way. Whereas this, if we're coming downwards, I would be allowed to signal it to here. And by the looks of it, I would have to probably take it all the way to Lichfield and reverse it. And probably what that means is there aren't ever any trains that come up here and reverse. If there were, probably there would be a little shunt signal down here. Oh, there is one there actually, one right there. And you would signal through to the shunt signal. So it looks like you can actually signal. Right, I'm going to now say that the line's normal by clicking that, and that's going to acknowledge normal, and now all of that is reset back to the beginning. So in general, that's a simplification, but that's the basic idea of route setting. Another thing you can't do, where's this one going, Lichfield City? You can't click on that and click all the way through to there. You can't set the whole route. You can only set one signal at a time. So if you're setting a longer route, you have to go click, 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 all the way across. But good practice is you don't set too much route in one go, and that's because lots of things can happen in the time it takes that train to move 4 or 5 blocks. Maybe another train has arrived here and needs to cross the line. Whatever might be happening, don't signal things all the way right through unless you know that there is nowhere else. Like in this case, there aren't any sidings or any junctions where a train's going to suddenly appear, so we don't need to worry too much. But when you get to places like this up here, you've just got to be careful. If you signal things through too early and then another train comes through here and then stops, If you then start cancelling routes, then that ends up slowing things down, because then the guy's going to call you, say, I saw the signal change from green to red, and then you tell him to call his control. That takes another 2-3 minutes, and everything gets blocked up. So be a bit careful about setting routes. But other than that, that should be enough to get you started with basic route selection. Questions or comments, as always, please put them below.